Good morning, Dr. Swain, Dr. Jawalam, and Swedish members. Good afternoon, Japanese members. ISDP and Kajima have been jointly studying climate change since last year. And today we're pleased to welcome Dr. Higa, a project manager of Swedish Bioenergy Association, and Dr. Swain of Uppsala University as our guest speakers address bioenergy in Sweden and the best practice case of Stockholm and hydro technology, renewable energy, and the Swedish future generation by 2050, respectively. And after that, we welcome Dr. Jayaram of Flay University as a guest discussant. So now Dr. Higa will be late, so let me ask Dr. Swain to make a presentation for 25 minutes. And once she comes, let her speak up for also 25 minutes. Then we will have a panel discussion among Dr. Higa, Dr. Swain, Dr. Jayaram, and our members for 40 minutes. After that, we will have ordinary Q&A session with our members. So first of all, may I ask Dr. Swanstrom to say a few words as opening remarks?
Dear Shikata-san, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, good afternoon and good evening, depending on where we are in the world today. I think Shikata-san mentioned most of the important things there, but climate change is really one of the most pressing issues today for our planet, and really our very survival in many cases. We have what we've seen is shrinking water supplies, but also rising sea levels, which can seem paradoxical. We have much more extreme weather patterns that has been pressing a lot of states, especially in the developing world. We see a lot of rather extreme consequences. And the climate change threat, I think, is too big for individual states to manage. And the nature of the very problem is truly global and needs multilateral solutions. And moreover, I think the spoiler effect is potentially devastating or leaving states outside. And I think the war in Ukraine might actually be an issue to look at, because what we see is that with the war in Ukraine, which is devastating, of course, here in Europe, but also had repercussions on global efforts to fight climate change, well, such as in the Arctic, where we have seen the Arctic cooperation basically run to halt. So what we need to look at is this multilateral solution that is separate from ideological and political conflicts. And if that is possible or not, it's going to be very difficult. But as Shikata-san mentioned, Kajima Institute for International Peace and ISDP has engaged in this one-year project on climate cooperation with Japan and Sweden. And we're trying to outline sort of best practices, the cooperation mechanism, and brainstorm policy recommendations. But of course, this is a project that needs much more attention. And I think that one of our first speakers now, Dr. Swain, of course, is one of these that have looked at this quite in detail. And I'm very much looking forward to listening to him and Cecilia about their expectations and their analysis of this. But for me, this is one of the projects that sort of borders both traditional security threats as well as new security threats, and reinforces both negative and positive cooperation. In one way, you can see climate change as something negative, but it also is something that I think the international community can cooperate around and is forced to cooperate around. So there both is a sort of a negative perspective on it and a positive. But I will let the speakers talk instead of me, and I would like to hand over the floor again to Shikata-san and then to Professor Swain. So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks. So now I'd like to welcome Dr. Swain Its title is The Hydrotechnology, Renewable Energy, and the Swedish Future Generations by 2050. So, Dr. Swain, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nicholas. And Jagannath, thank you for inviting me to speak to this conference. I think it is extremely important now that we are bringing us back, or at least try to emphasize, bring the emphasis on the climate change discussion. It's extremely important in that sense that given the time we are going through, particularly a country like in Northern Europe, a country like Sweden, where you expect the discussions to be mostly focused on climate change, but we have lost, for the last several months, there is no, after Glasgow, there is no discussion, nothing on this issue. We have moved into as if the whole world is with the Ukraine crisis, the climate change has stopped. And that's something which is, of course, the Ukraine war is extremely serious matter, but that doesn't mean that we should really get our focus out of the crisis, which is the even survival crisis which the planet is facing. I think this is in this context, it's very, very important. There have been just on this Monday, before the G7 meeting started, BBC journalist called me and wanted me to speak on what is going on in the G7 meeting and the politics about it. I said, look, I will only speak if you ask me to talk about the climate change issues and the food security. That's what I would like to speak, rather than your particularly the G7 meeting and how it will impact the Ukraine war. I really, there are many other ways you can bring that in. We are talking all the time. There is no need now. At least I think we should realize what the G7 can do in the climate change meeting. And they agreed, fortunately. But I think this is something which is very, very important on this topic. I think we need to bring our attention back, because there is time is running out, to be honest. And thank you for doing so. So saying that, I will be giving in this whatever the time I have, I will be talking about what is going on globally, rather, and then focus on a country like Sweden. What are the issues, what are the positive signs, and what are the hopeful signs also. So it's not that everything is bad all the time. So despite evidences of all sorts of, there is a severe impacts of climate change. The world continues, we have got all these impacts, but the world continues to ignore the urgency. The leaders, particularly political leaders, are ignoring the crisis altogether or being busy with the blaming others. The lack of seriousness by a political class to see and realize the current destructions by changing climate leads to repeated failures of the conference of the parties, the KIIP meetings, and all other negotiations related to climate change. It has even become a cliche for the world leaders to discuss that the climate change needs to be stopped because we need to protect the planet for future generations. This sounds very pretentious, because as if everything is fine now and we just need to worry about our future generation. And I think the world quite wrongly believe that the impact of climate change or something has already come. It's not coming in the future, but it's the concern, very much big concern at present. The global average temperature has already increased by 1 degree centigrade since the beginning of the last century. The rate of warming has more than doubled in the previous 40 years period compared to the earlier period. The uneven pattern of warming has already affected some regions more than others. For example, the Arctic region is warming at a faster rate than the rest of the world. The Middle East, another region where the situation has worsened. And because it's warming twice as fast as the global average, that region. I mean, it was already the Middle East was already a region which is quite bad, warm. The Gulf countries have consistently been recording a temperature over 50 degrees centigrade in the summer months. Urban centers have been facing agonizing hot temperatures. Extreme temperature and severe droughts have already affected economic activities and agricultural productions in that region. Even in this town, which is Uppsala, here in Uppsala, they said that now we have moved into for the temperate track. We are the cold temperate region to its a temperate region. I mean, because I think our temperature has become much warmer than before. And you can see that recent climate change induced extreme events such as heavy rainfall, heat waves, high floods have broken historical records. According to World Meteorological Association, the number of climate and weather-related disasters has already increased 5 times over 50 years. While improved early warning saves lives, economic losses have become massive. I come from an area in India originally. When I was a kid, you could see, we call it cyclone that time, a big one in 4 or 5 years once it comes, and that we have all experienced. But now every year, at least 4 or 5 big ones coming. And this is quite, of course, the people are not dying that much. I mean, I know the last one, 99, which was a big, that came they call it super cyclone, almost 10,000 got killed. But now, not many, but I think there has been a lot of things which you can give. The administration has been conscious how to address it. And there have been a number of ways already infrastructure has been built also, the historical experiences, a lot of things, also political will, which is quite important to have that. But I think at the same time, there's a huge loss taking place. The way the area is affected regularly, it's quite difficult for people like even those middle class to survive in those days. So I think it's important that we should remember that if there is a death rate has gone down because of this climate change related natural disaster, but that has really brought also huge economic losses, huge losses in the survival of common people. The political leaders and media keep saying that climate change will force people to migrate in the future. That's always this kind of idea which we hear in this part of the world. But the reality is the climate change has already forced people to leave their homes and move to the other areas. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, that the number of people displaced by climate disasters has reached 23 to 24 million by the end of 2021. So of course, in recent years, there have been a major increase in continuing to increase because of the conflicts, but also climate-related disasters is forcing a lot of people to migrate. We can come back to this discussion, the internal displacement and the refugee discussions. Probably we should not be in this part of the world. I'm talking even this part of the world in Sweden, probably we are not really extremely affected because of the internal displacement issue, because that stays in the third world, developing countries. We don't care unless they reach us. But I think it brings a number of problem. And in Europe, we didn't see that internal displacement before Ukraine crisis started. So we didn't have many, but now it's a huge, even almost 10 million people have been already internally displaced in Ukraine itself. But that's a different conflict. Moreover, in 100 years, the sea level has approximately increased by 16 to 21 centimeters. and almost half of that increase has taken place in the last 3 decades. NASA says the current rate of sea level rise is unprecedented compared to the past several millennia. While small island countries and coastal plains are not underwater yet, warming seawater and climate change-induced coastal erosion have brought significant changes in their human settlement pattern and socioeconomic conditions. You see that this is the sea level rise, islands going under the water is not new. I mean, these discussions, the first time, I think in 1983, the then Maldivian president had gone to the UN General Assembly and said that, hey, guys, if you don't stop this, my country will disappear. Still, Maldives is there, but I think there is a huge possibility now, what he had said in 1983. This is going almost now, after 40 years, it almost looks like it's not very far. It was not like something he had made up. Something. So this is something we need to realize, that it is not that we didn't know. We were aware of this threat for a long time now, but we have failed to do anything to get that fixed. Climate change has already brought changes to water supply and demand patterns. Countries have started disputing more over their shared rivers. The existing arrangement of water resources between and within countries in the arid and semi-arid regions have become also more conflictual. One of the things which, if you want, I can discuss quite in detail about how the climate change has brought into a major water conflict between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan in recent. It's ongoing. It's also going to become again, I think today is 30th, when Ethiopia will be going for the third year of filling of the dam, which will be a major one this year. We'll see again this issue taking a lot of media space. But for the last 3 years, the world is saying that there will be a war over the water. It hasn't taken place. But so for the first time, it is becoming a very, very significantly security issue in that part of the world, at least. Climate change that caused natural disasters are also playing an increasingly vital role in causing civil wars. The impact of climate is not something to worry about the such that it should not be only worried about the future, what the politicians are saying. They're already there creating huge ecological, economic, social, political, human, and humanitarian crisis. So the world leaders must give climate change their topmost priority and address it now. They must listen to the chair of the elders, Mary Robinson, while negotiating at the Glasgow COP26. She said, I quote, "Now is the moment for decisive action, not obfuscation of our half measures." The politics has unfortunately failed. The reality is that despite the science and evidence being unequivocal over climate change, the political leaders are primarily engaged in politicking instead of donning the leadership mantle to take concrete measures against climate change. The developed world, the world leaders are talking big, but most are trying everything to avoid any commitment. On the other hand, the leaders of the poor countries are indulged in taking the cover of history and blaming the rich, rather than planning for the future and preparing themselves to adapt to the changing planet. If you have a cancer, you can just blame your neighbor. And that's what is happening. So as per the Global Climate Risks Index 2021, the 10 most affected countries by climate change were Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Bahamas, Japan, Malawi, Afghanistan, India, South Sudan, Niger, and Bolivia. But if climate risk gets calculated in the long-term index from 2000 to 2019, the 10 most affected countries or territories were Puerto Rico, Myanmar, Haiti, Philippines, Mozambique, Bahamas, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Thailand, and Nepal. All these countries, besides Japan and possibly Puerto Rico, are struggling to develop, both economically and politically. It's a cruel irony that the people and countries in Asia, Africa, and South America are the ones who are suffering the most from climate change, but have done the least to cause it. Considering their economic strength and political maturity, different countries in the climate risk regions, they respond differently to these challenges, whether we like it or not. The most affected regions are still split between haves and have-nots. Some are better at planning, implementing mitigation and adaptation strategies to meet the survival crisis posed by climate change. Take, for example, Japan has already announced a 46% reduction in its greenhouse gas emission by 2030, almost double the target that it was committed after the Paris Agreement. But that's only some countries. But if you look at the UN Climate Conference, has failed to meet the challenge. Political leadership keep discussing, debating, but differing over rules and regulations. US is trying hard to keep its polluting industries protected from any liability or paying compensation. Meanwhile, countries like Brazil, China, India, South Africa ask for carryover of unsold carbon credits under the Kyoto Protocol to the proposed carbon market scheme. Countries have pledged, since 2009, countries have pledged to mobilize $100 billion annually. But this is yet to be achieved. But you know that we are spending 2 trillion. This year we have the 2020, this year will be much more. But in 2021, we spent more than 2 trillion on military expenditure. Now, Germany is saying that it will be creating a fund of $600 billion in climate infrastructure fund. For heaven's sake, we haven't even got $100 billion. I mean, these are the talks which come without any kind of real concrete action in place. It's very nice, good to fool people, but at least what we are doing, we must look at what our record is. This is not the money, there is not money in short supply. We saw how much money was there for the Ukraine war. So it's the willingness and commitment of the political leaders. That's what is the short supply here. The Paris Agreement binds the signing countries to contain global warming to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial level, and aspirational limit is 1.5. But the commitment made for cutting emissions during the Paris Agreement was too weak to reach that target. And therefore, there has been an agreement among parties to return every 5 years with a revised nationally determined contributions, NDC. There are 197 parties to the convention, but 119 parties to the Paris Agreement, 91 parties to the Paris Agreement. There are only 151 fast NDCs are recorded. The NDC registry, which I checked last time. The total number of second NDC is merely 11. So to limit the rise of global warming to 1.5, the planet needs a 45% reduction in the carbon emissions. Nonetheless, the country's commitment made under the NDCs will instead result in an increase of 16%, forget about reducing 45%. By 2030, compared to 2010 level. The IPCC report released in August 21 suggests that climate change is already widespread, rapid, and intensifying. The UN Secretary General has already described the situation as code red for humanity, and urged the world before the Glasgow summit to decisively to keep the hope of limiting global warming to 1.5 alive. For that, the G20 economies need to join the net zero emission coalition and provide credible, concrete, and enhanced NDCs, but it's not happening. Only few major emitters like EU, UK, and US have submitted their second NDCs, which are updated with more cuts since the Paris Agreement. Countries like Australia, Brazil, China, Indonesia, Russia, Saudi Arabia have not yet followed suit. And that's, without them, you cannot really successfully counter climate change. The world needs to come together. That's what we have forgotten. Climate change, you cannot fight the climate change fighting a third world war or fighting a third, whatever the war, or the Cold War or war. You can't fight a war and keep two groups fighting against each other, and then you can fight the climate change. That's impossible. US and China need to come together if there is any possible hope of keeping even 2 degrees alive. Forget about 1.5. And that's not happening. So the political leadership, it cannot afford to waste time in the battle with climate change. Efforts such as COP26 continue to disappoint. And then now the next COP1 will be in Egypt, the other one in UAE. Do you expect, I mean, the countries, these countries do you expect them to give the leadership to the climate change? I'm sorry, I don't see any hope. The world leaders might choose to ignore this, but the devastating impacts of climate change is becoming more pronounced and irreversible in the background. And effects are taking shape faster than the predicted. As I mentioned, the next opportunity will be in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, in November. But I think I really, as I said, I don't really see much hope. But there is one thing which is taking place is that there is a growing awareness in the world that this is a serious issue. If you look at the UNEP emissions gap report, there is a World Economic Forum's global risk updated report. I'm sorry. We find the climate change to be a dominant risk over the next 10 years horizon. And by extension, the greater threat to humanity. So it's important that decision makers need to come and do what they're supposed to do. There is one thing, as I said, it's important. Also, people are recognizing the risk. They expect their government to act. So it's not that the political leadership are not acting because people don't want it. The World Risk Poll of 2020 reveals that 41% of people globally consider it's a very serious threat to their country, and 28% are somewhat concerned. Only 13% don't find climate change as a threat. So why political leadership are silent or not taking actions? Climate movements are demanding concrete actions from political leaders. Even school children are mobilizing across the world, demanding policymakers to take it seriously and work to secure their futures. But unfortunately, that is not reflecting in the global negotiations which you are witnessing. Coming back to Sweden, the energy transition in Sweden is well underway. The country is increasingly using renewable energy. In 2020, Sweden generated 50% of its energy from renewable resources, a target that was met and an impressive 8 years in advance of the original target was it was in 2012 they did it. It was the original target was supposed to be 2020. Now Sweden aims to have 100% renewable electricity production by 2040. The success of the Swedish transition is largely down to the use of bioenergy for heating and the use of hydrogen power for electricity productions, currently accounting for 45%. Nuclear power is 30%. The large-scale construction of dams, Sweden is not new in exploiting hydropower. currently accounting for, began in the 1890s, but experienced major expansion in the post Second World War period. Sweden has now almost 1,800 hydropower dams and 600 regulating dams. It's a small country. But 203 dams above 10 megawatt level. So it's most of them are small dams. They provide 93%, but these big dams only, they only 203 dams provide 93% of all the hydropower. So of course there are so many dams, but the main ones are providing almost all the hydropower. The development of hydropower has also some ecological and social consequences. Firstly, the dams have led to water regulation in 4,000 river water bodies and 1,000 lakes, causing the submergence of land and blocking the migration of fish, as well as creating connectivity issues. There have been movements, some river savers association that called the that aims to rewild Swedish rivers. Secondly, 80% of large-scale hydropower electric power generation in Sweden is located in traditional Sami lands, which is the indigenous population. The historical exploitation of the Sami population is an ongoing debate in Sweden, and hydropower is unfortunately impacting reindeer husbandry by fragmenting pastures and obstructing migration routes. So there is, of course, Sweden has been progressing quite well for the renewable energy generation. There is a lot of focus on hydropower, has been a lot of focus on hydropower, but the record is not very clean because there are other issues also needs to be kept in mind. But what is going on in this context, that there is a strong youth movement which has come out globally and also locally too. In 2019, 16 children from across the world, including Sweden's Greta Thunberg, filed a global lawsuit petitioning the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child to hold 5 of the world's leading economic powers accountable to inaction over the climate crisis. This came on the back of the climate strike movement, which has grown over the last 3 years into a network of global campaigns demanding a systematic change to address climate change. School strikes are not new. The youth climate has reached an unprecedented global scale, targeting economic and political establishment for producing violence and injustice in forms, now relating to the climate change. Greta is also no means the first young climate activist, but the social media has given Greta and her colleagues the power and reach to mobilize millions of young people that was not possible before. Sweden has made several positive moves to engage the youth into their climate responses through several organizations are there, Nature and Youth Sweden, Global Shapers, Climate Student Sweden, National Council of Swedish Youth Organizations, PUSH Sweden, Guides and Scouts of Sweden, you name it, Church of Sweden's Youth, We Change, WWF Sweden, Sweden Youth of, we also remember that there are several organizations, but they are also thriving with the support also of the agencies and institutions, or particularly the government. The Swedish official delegation to the UN conferences are always represented by these youth climate activists. You will see that they're directly not only going into this kind of UN conferences, but also actively taking part in the negotiations. So they are part of the government delegation. The Swedish youth engagement is not surprising, given that Sweden has a long historical and cultural tradition of children and youth participating in social and political issues. So we should not be surprised that why a country of 10 million people, it can produce the Greta Thunberg. because it is a country which has the history of or historical way of providing that space to the children and youth. And that has brought in this. So Greta is just one of the representative of this kind of, I mean, my daughter keeps, I have been working on water issue for at least for 30 years, but my daughter comes back from the school and gives me a lecture all the time about how I should use the water. So this is what, I mean, has gone into the kind of, to train the youth from the beginning. The youths have contributed much less to the, so I think it's young people are especially concerned about the climate change. They're working to instigate actions both domestically and globally through international solidarity. They're connecting with each other. The youth have contributed much less to climate change, but are disproportionately bearing the brunt of its impact. The intergeneration inequity is the basis of their strong moral argument for climate action. Being that the youth population in the global south is significantly high, the strength in their numbers will be advantageous in ensuring that the youth are heard. So the political leaderships must realize that it is not anymore, they cannot ignore this. Ultimately, the climate movement is going to be long because, it's not an easy battle. It's not going to end soon. It's not going to tomorrow, the political leadership are going to decide and take the demands into the action. It's going to be a long battle. And so the rise of the youth climate movement brings some hope because it brings these ideas, it can keep this movement for a long, it continues and it goes beyond the small area or the geographical limit, and it creates an international action. And I think that's a positive side of this youth movement, which has brought into that there is bringing some hope to this kind of desperation, the kind of hopeless time we are passing through. I will stop here. Thank you. I think I spoke a bit longer than I should, but.
No problem. Thank you very much for sending us a very strong message that climate change is not the problem in the future, but the great threat to humanity at present. And that now is the moment for decisive action. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So Dr. Panda Dr. Higa is now.
So, Sikata-san, she will be late for another 20-30 minutes. So maybe we can start with the discussions and questions for Professor Swain. So maybe we can go ahead with the discussions first.
All right. Is Mr. Kobayashi there? Okay. Maybe he's not here. All right. So then may I invite, first of all, Dr. Jairam to speak up as at the start of the discussion about the members.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this session. And after listening to Professor Swain, I mean, he's covered a lot of ground on so many issues which are interconnected with each other. And this is a crucial point in time, as he mentioned, and this was also something that needs to be reiterated again and again, because the fact that he mentioned that climate change is not a problem of the future anymore. And I think this is very clearly being reflected, particularly in many developing countries, which are affected by climate change even more than the industrialized countries where the impacts are much lesser seen. I mean, if I have to say that. But of course, this is a global problem, and as Professor Swain mentioned, that it looks like there is no hope, but then we also don't have the luxury of pessimism, right? So that's where we are stuck right now. That how do we find ways to cooperate with each other, find solutions that can be upscaled, or can be like developed and deployed on a much larger scale. How do we bring along people, populations and leaders with different perspectives together? And this becomes like a very crucial period of time to figure out all these different questions. So, I mean, I'll start with some of the points just to also kind of reflect upon what Professor Swain mentioned. And I think G7 summit obviously is fresh in the minds of everyone because of the communique which came out. And if you look at the communique, what, the message that you get is not very bright once again. So much of language around climate, especially about fossil fuels and, phasing out of fossil fuels, or road transport sector decarbonization, and so many other promises that were made earlier. All these commitments are sort of watered down now. And herein, we also have to see, why is this happening? This is not just because of differences between developed and developing countries in the classic, like global south, global north debates. It's also because there are so many differences among the G7 countries themselves as to how to go forward, especially at a time when there is insecurities concerning energy. For instance, we are sitting in Europe. I'm in Germany, where obviously there is a lot of insecurity about where the energy is going to come from in the winters, for instance. And is the only way to really scale up your coal-fired plants, or accelerated decarbonization, which is possible. But then, there is political will, but at the same time, is it possible with the technological and policy or structural kind of systems that we have locked into? So we also have to remember the kind of carbon intensive systems that we have locked into. How do we kind of break out of this in a way that will also be acceptable, to the people, who are most affected by these changes around inflation and food crisis and so many other issues. So this is something that we have to kind of keep at the back of our minds. The other part is about carbon pricing, right? So this is again a crucial question. How many countries have the capacity to sort of put in place carbon pricing mechanisms? So G7 countries obviously have much more capacity. The EU, for instance, already has these mechanisms in place. All the European countries have put these mechanisms in place. Some countries within the G7 don't have like nationwide carbon pricing mechanisms. That includes countries like Japan, or US, Canada, or so all these countries which haven't put in place these mechanisms. How do you have this concept of climate club that Germany has proposed during the G7? What does it exactly mean when all these countries are in different spaces working around solutions which are probably not coordinated with each other? And what is this exclusivity that is probably going to leave out many countries of the world from the discussions around decarbonization? And of course, the G7 has proposed like just energy transition partnerships with countries like India, Indonesia, with South Africa. There is already a deal that exists. So with all these things happening, you wonder, like, is this another way of sort of, moving away from the crux of the debate, trying to suggest another sort of solution like the climate club, and which is already sort of again watered down because not all countries agree on, say, carbon pricing, because the EU or countries within the EU, like Germany, for instance, also wants to have a carbon border adjustment program, which many countries don't agree to, including in the developing world. So this kind of mistrust that exists within the system is something that obviously needs like further discussion. And another thing which is also interesting to sort of look into is the Ukraine crisis, right? So obviously Ukraine crisis, as Professor Swain mentioned, it probably takes away attention from climate change. But for those who want to see it, it actually reinforces the need to look at climate change and many other interconnected issues. But obviously, it depends on the lens that you use to look at it. Obviously, it's to some extent you're looking at the geopolitical sort of conundrum that we are in. But on the other hand, this also reflects the kind of food crisis that we are facing today. I mean, most of the developing countries are reeling under extreme levels of food insecurity, where this is also affected by the supply chains being disrupted. Many countries which are also kind of reeling under energy insecurities. Again, this has to do with the Ukraine crisis. Now, how do we link these issues? Because I feel very often we are stuck in the discussions around reducing emissions, and mitigation. Adaptation still hasn't got that much of traction, as we saw in the bond negotiations recently. Loss and damage did not get the traction. The financing facility could not be set up because most industrialized countries were not ready to were not ready to set set any commitments for financing such a facility, because already you have $100 billion and all these other promises that are yet to be fulfilled, right? So this becomes a huge question. So in terms of the political outcomes that come out of bond negotiations or the Stockholm plus 50 that was that just happened, you just wondered, do these big symmetries, do they actually produce the results that we want anymore? Already there is a lot of kind of trust deficit when it comes to institutions, and that we are seeing in many ways through populistic and many other kind of governments coming into power in many parts of the world. That institutions, are they delivering, and are they actually able to reflect the changes that are happening within the societies, and are they always kind of just sticking to the low-hanging fruits, which is what is happening with all the different crises that is happening. So then in that sense, we also have to question the stability and the sustainability of the institutions that we have built over a period of time, especially through this liberal sort of international order. Are they functioning? How do we revitalize them? And in this respect, countries like Sweden and Japan and many others obviously have a huge role to play, especially Sweden, which has had this long history of environmental and climate and leadership, especially since the 1972 Stockholm Summit. Some of the other points that I wanted to mention, especially with regard to Sweden and the youth movements, and I think this is a very important story, right? So obviously, youth movements exist in many parts of the world. It's not just in Sweden. There are many youth movements that particularly exist in the global south, in the developing countries, which don't get reflected much in the media for various reasons. But then, what is it that Sweden is doing differently, at least from my observations, is that how they are building, of course, as Professor Swain also mentioned, the space that is given to these youth movements in politics is very important, right? So the political space needs to kind of accept the youth perspectives. Because from what I see, the youth is able to see these problems in a much clearer way. They are able to see issues of equity, justice, the vulnerabilities, about transition, and so many other issues much more clearly. And this has to do with also the educational system, the university system, and the kind of interlinkages that can be built between different educational systems within, say, Sweden or across the world. So this is a very important thing, and I see that of late, obviously, with like various summits being held, the youth are increasingly being represented in these discussions, and this has to do with the rise of youth movements in many parts of the world. And I wouldn't say all these youth movements are a monolith. Obviously, they have different priorities depending on where they come from. And that is very clear in how some of these youth movements, for instance, talk about issues in developing countries where, as I mentioned, many of these issues are interconnected with each other. You cannot talk about climate without talking about water, food, livelihoods, and many other issues. So these issues are somewhere need to be also kind of streamlined. So I think what the fact is that in Sweden, for instance, I see that with the push for science and research and and also with the kind of push that is being given to the youth to find solutions as well, like through university systems or other educational institutions, this gets much more kind of streamlined, and that also leads to giving more space, leads to giving more space to the youth in these systems. And last but not the least, maybe I should also kind of talk about some of the things that Sweden, for instance, when it comes to the Eco Innovation Index, I was reading about it a few days ago, and I saw that Sweden is ranked number 4 in the EU. And what are these technologies that are being developed, right? So, and can these technologies be capitalized upon? Like, and I think technologies in the sense, like, it also has to take care of, when, I mean, just to also kind of give a disclaimer to this, because I think when we talk about energy transition, for instance, we're not talking about what kind of risks energy transition, for instance, pose, right? So of course, just transition is one thing, but then does it actually lead to dependence on, certain countries which are obviously dominating the rare earths mining sector, for instance, or not just the critical minerals extraction, but also the processing of these minerals, which is something very critical to understanding how do we go about this energy transitions. We are talking about industrial decarbonization. We are talking about transport, climate innovation in the transport sector. We are talking about batteries. Batteries, again, we also have to think about, 10 years down the line, if we are going to dump all the batteries somewhere and we don't know how to deal with it, that's also a problem, right? So we have to think of circular economy approach towards lithium batteries. We have to think about construction sector, because many countries in the global south are still developing and still require a lot of resources to develop. So there are so many technologies that are out there which have been which have been invented or which have been developed in countries like Sweden. What do we do with these technologies, and how do we use them in a way that can also bring about social and sustainable sort of development in the other parts of the world? So these are some of the things which obviously require a lot more reflections at a time when, of course, there is a lot of geopolitical sort of rivalries and other things that exist in the world. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your very comprehensive comment. You cover so many areas. So next, may I ask Ambassador Valgo to speak up about situation in Sweden or any other important issues?
Well, thank you, and most of all, thank to Dr. Swain for alarming but very well put presentation underlining the difficulties that we have. I will just touch upon a few of them. He said one expression that I really noted was, I think it was something like, the poor countries are also hiding behind history. And I think this is very important, and while also underlining that the leaders are ignoring, in fact, the climate change issue. I think one of the problems in Sweden, as an example, is that the climate change issue is tied to so many other political issues. For instance, we have a Green Party that has on its agenda, as number one agenda, I would say, measures against the climate change. But then in political debates in television and in parliament, they are also strongly, for instance, underlining that they are against the NATO expansion. And this makes them very unpopular among a large part of the electorate, saying that if they are against that, how can we trust them in other issues? So sometimes the people who are engaged very much in actions against climate change, in my view, are shooting themselves in the foot by getting involved in other issues. So perhaps for the leaders to be more engaged, it's also necessary to scale down certain activities that are not connected with climate change, or at least decouple the various political issues. I think that it was also pointed out that the youth movement in Sweden is given space, and this is very important, that we actually listen to them. I think this is something that of course should be seen all over the world, and it is seen sometimes. But one behavior that is, I think, is spreading and becoming very very common is that at international conferences, the political leaders, they know how to express themselves. They know how to sort of flirt with the electorate, and at those instances and those conferences, they are very happy to talk to young leaders like Greta Thunberg, for instance. But then after leaving the conference, they have other issues on their mind. This, I think, is one of the reasons why it's so hard to get real action. It is the pollution, you can say, of the climate change issue by other issues. So somehow, I don't know what the solution is, but I think that it is necessary to make the climate change issue an issue that is not dealt with from a left-right perspective in politics. You need to have an agreement that this is an issue of urgency that needs to be dealt with especially. But then again, when it comes to the way we look at our renewable energies, there is, I think, a majority in Sweden for an expansion of nuclear power. While there are, within the environmental movement, there are those who very much strongly are against nuclear because of the difficult problems that the nuclear energy creates. And again, what is more important? Is it to have fossil-free production of energy, or is it that we should look at all and every source of energy and look at the problems that they can cause, and thereby undermine the issues against climate change? I think when one needs to somehow define climate change as something that is above everything, that really needs to be treated. We have, between Europe, the EU, and Japan, a very nice and fine strategic partnership agreement, the SPA. And within that agreement, there are some 40 articles. And for instance, the article number 23 talks about cooperation in climate change, but also Article 26 on energy and so forth and so on. There are many ways forward where we can cooperate, but we have to ask ourselves also, what happens when you have articles like this? Well, you set up committees, the committees meet on regular basis, and then this multilateral way of dealing with issues ending up with creating nice declarations and thereby satisfying the people who participate in the fora, rather than really solving the problems. I think I will. I hope I have provoked some other reactions, and I think I'll stop there. But I think that to sum it up, I think that it is very unfortunate that the climate change issue has also become, in many ways, a political left and right issue.
Okay, thank you very much for your very insightful comment. I think it must be the basis of further discussion. Now I think we have a Dr. Higa with us. So would you please make a presentation for 20-30 minutes?
Yes, I will. I think I need to share. I will share my screen.
Yes, please.
please, can I ask someone from ISDP if you have my presentation, because I don't know why I cannot share my presentation today, my screen.
Okay, I think
Yes.
yes, we are trying to upload it. So let me request my colleague Miss Anna.
Yes, I will share this presentation soon. Great, thank you.
Okay, here we are.
Thank you. So good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the ISDP for the invitation in this webinar. And I'm having a problem with my camera, and because of that, my camera is not working in a very good way. But I think you can listen to me and you have my slides, and I think it's okay.
Okay.
So today I'm talking about bioenergy in Sweden and the best practice case of Stockholm Centre. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I start presenting my company, the Swedish Bioenergy Association, or SVEBIO. And this company was founded 40 years ago in Stockholm in order to support the bioenergy field in Sweden and also in the Nordic area. And currently, we are a strong trade association and a boutique consultancy focused on clean energy and bioenergy. And we are also connected to the biggest companies in Sweden in the energy field and also in Europe. And we held projects together with other consultancies and agencies and universities, not only in Sweden, but also in Europe and more places. And then our mission is to have a society in which we have 100% of renewable energy with a lot of bioenergy. And for that, we operate through information, advocacy, and economic policy impact. And we believe that we have an important role in forming public opinion through articles, press releases, consultations, reports, conferences, personal contacts, and meetings with politicians and authorities in Sweden and also in Europe. And we are also working for increasing the export of Swedish bioenergy technology in several projects. Next slide, please. About me, I'm a project manager at SVEBIO, and then I'm working with projects on bioenergy and energy policy, sustainability, and green economy in Sweden and abroad. And I'm also a national team leader for Sweden at Task 44 about flexible bioenergy and system integration at the International Energy Agency. And I'm a coach of new students at KIIP. And then I help them to better integrate in the Swedish society. And occasionally I give some lectures on energy policy and sustainability topics at KIIP. And I also have a PhD in energy system planning by the School of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Campinas in Brazil, including a one-year period at the School of Industrial Engineering and Management at KIIP here in Sweden. And finally, I have an MBA in Strategic Planning and Business by Kagawa University School of Management in Japan. Next slide. Okay, here we have the structure that I'm following today. I begin presenting some initial concepts related to carbon capture, usage, and storage. And then I present a general background about CCUS in the world. And then we go to the CCUS in the Nordic area, and then CCUS and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage in Sweden. And then there is this very interesting case, the Stockholm Centre, that I choose to present today. And then I close this presentation with some final considerations. So here we have some initial concepts or a general background on CCUS, and then this technology can capture and make effective use of the high concentrations of CO2 emitted by industrial activities. And also it's an important emissions reduction technology that can be applied across the energy system. And finally, CCUS can play an important and diverse role in meeting global energy and climate goals, not only in Sweden, but also globally. In this slide, we have a very interesting image summing up this technology. And I think the main points here, or the most important ones, are CCUS as a technology involves the capture of CO2 from large point sources, and then including power generation or industrial facilities that use either fossil fuels or biomass for fuel. And the CO2 can also be captured directly from the atmosphere. And then if not being used on site, this captured CO2 is compressed and transported by pipeline or ship or rail or truck to be used in a range of applications or injected into deep geological formations, including depleted oil and gas reservoirs or saline formations, which can trap the CO2 for permanent storage. Next slide, please. And then about the technology, it's important to remember that CO2 capture is an integral part of the many industrial processes, and the technologies to separate and capture CO2 from flue gas streams have been commercially available since a long time. And then the most advanced and widely adopted capture technologies are chemical absorption and physical separation. And chemical absorption is used in small and large scale projects in power generation, fuel transformation, and industrial production globally. And physical separation is more utilized in natural gas processing and ethanol, methanol, and hydrogen production. Here we have the main pathways for CO2. And here is important to consider that CO2 can be used as an input to a broad range of products and services that are very important for the current society, as we can see in this image. And also the potential applications for CO2 include direct use, and then we have the right column. And then the CO2 is not chemically altered, and also the transformation of CO2 to a useful product through chemical and biological processes are in the left side. And the production of fertilizers, cooling, and water can be mentioned as important examples here, considering the use of CO2. Next slide, please. Here we have these CCUS facilities in operation, this graph showing the CCUS facilities in operation by application between 1980 and 2021. And we can observe a growing trend since the 80s, as well as new sources being utilized. And currently, facilities around the world have the capacity to capture more than 40 million tons of CO2 per year. And some of these facilities have been operating since the 70s, when natural gas processing plants in the US began supplying CO2 to local oil producers for oil recovery operations. And then since then, the deployment of this technology has expanded to more regions and more applications globally. And also the first large-scale CO2 capture and injection project with the dedicated CO2 storage and monitoring occurred in Norway. It was in a gas facility in Norway in 1996. And this project has the capacity now to store more than 20 million tons of CO2 in a deep saline formation located around more or less 1 kilometer under the North Sea. Next slide, please. Here we have this image showing a new scenario or a new momentum of this technology, because we have some of the most important CCUS projects globally. And then we observe that when we have stronger investment incentives and climate goals building this new momentum, it's possible to develop more or to rely more in this type of technology. And also the portfolio of planned project is growing in a relative fast pace. And many of these plans involve the development of industrial hubs, which can capture CO2 from a range of facilities with shared CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. And also in this image, there is a Brazilian case highlighted, and this case was being developed, but now I think this project is stagnated due to political reasons in the country, unfortunately. And besides that, there is an expressive number of CCUS pilot plants and demonstration projects globally. And as I said before, I'm going to present one very interesting Swedish case related to that. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, going to CCUS in the Nordic area. It's important to consider that the Nordic countries, they have different starting points, geologically, economically, politically, but the ambitious climate goals are common for all of them. And these targets, these ambitious climate targets, can be achieved using CCUS as a kind of a complement to other measures. And when we talk about Sweden and Finland, it's important to connect this technology with bioenergy, because both countries have a high share of solid biomass in their total energy consumption. And then capturing CO2 from the combustion of biomass in bio-CCS could be an effective and cost-efficient option in order to achieve carbon negative solutions. However, in both countries also, there is a small number of CCU projects in operation. And here we have another image summing up this technology, but relating it to bioenergy, because this is quite important in the Nordic area, especially for Finland and Norway and also Denmark. And then again, CCUS involves the capture of CO2 from fuel combustion or industrial processes, and then the transport of the captured CO2 and either use as carbon resource in biofuels or other products, or permanent storage in geological formations. Next slide, please. So here we have this very interesting initiative. It's a transnational initiative named the Network Group on CCUS, or NEG CCUS. And then this is a platform for discussing CCUS policy and strategy issues. And then it's a platform between Nordic and Baltic countries. And then the focus is on cooperation within CCUS policy development, and also the promotion of information exchange and cooperation on decarbonization focusing on CCUS development and relevant policies in the region. And this group also monitors the CCUS development in the Nordic Baltic countries. And then finally, we go to CCUS and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage in Sweden. And when we talk about CCUS here, we need to talk about bioenergy and the relation with bioenergy with this technology, because Sweden is in a transition pathway towards implementing CCUS with a particular emphasis on bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, because Sweden has a large forestry sector and the use of biomass byproducts in the energy sector is very important. However, there is a need to create policy support schemes and also some additional issues that need to be addressed are very important, because the public acceptance, future uses of biomass for energy, national and international policies, as well as industry investment cycles and bottlenecks in storage capacity are very important elements or factors that can influence, they have the power to influence the trajectory of the transition pathway for CCS, CCUS, and all of these type of technologies in Sweden. And then here we have the best practice case, and Stockholm Exergi is a very important and interesting case because it's one of the first companies in the world to develop a model for enabling the shift from reduced CO2 emissions to negative emissions. And they have a very active research and development sector. And then as part of its research and development activities in the sector, Stockholm Exergi is working on how bioenergy with carbon capture and storage can contribute to reach national and international climate goals. Also because Stockholm Exergi is also considering the targets related to the Paris Agreement. And then bioenergy with carbon capture and storage has a great potential of slowing global warming, rebalancing the climate sustainably. And according to their calculations, there is a potential to capture 800 million tons of CO2 per year at the bio cogeneration plant that they have in Stockholm. Here we have a picture of this plant that will probably be one of the largest plants in the world related to this field. I was there, I think 2 years ago, and it was quite impressive. And it's a very, I think it's one of the most interesting cases that we have in Sweden to explore. Next slide, please. Here we have more considerations about the Stockholm Exergi. And then this research facility was inaugurated in December 2019. And the goal that they have is that this research facility, together with an ongoing integration study that they have, will be able to provide outcomes to form the basis for the company to invest in a large-scale facility. However, we also need to consider that this type of technology is a cost-effective technology for decreasing CO2 in comparison to other alternatives. And also the costs related to the implementation of the technology in a plant are also substantial. And then there is a great need of updated regulations and new economic instruments to support it. And also, the plant utilizes biofuel to produce district heating and electricity for Stockholm. And the combustion delivers biogenic CO2 that will return to plants by photosynthesis, building a kind of a climate neutral cycle. And the technology used is called hot potassium carbonate, HPC, or carbon scrubbing. And this technology was chosen because of low risk associated with it, as well as high energy efficiency and space requirements and scalability and environmental sustainability. Here we have some final considerations to close this presentation and to consider the main points. CCUS is an essential technology for facilitating carbon neutrality and is a very cost-effective technology that needs financial support. And then from our governments, we need new economic tools and updated regulations. In Sweden, the Swedish Energy Agency is trying to support this technology somehow, but still this type of support or initiatives are still in initial phase. And then this is very complicated because some political parties showed an interest on this type of technology being developed here, but until now we don't have an effective policy in order to support the development of this type of technology. And also CCUS technology and its elements, capture, transport, storage, and utilization demand multidisciplinary and transnational collaboration. Because of that, I showed you the transnational collaboration between Nordic countries and Baltic countries, because this is very important. This exchange of knowledge can contribute a lot to the development of this technology. And even though the technology has been around since the 80s, further maturing of technologies is highly needed for a large scale deployment. And lastly, but not least, the public opinion or public acceptance issues should also be considered as a very important point, because I thought it's also related to the policymaking process and etc. But in Denmark, the country has some problems related to the public opinion and CCUS, and there is a kind of a potential to have the same problems in Sweden if we don't work on this type of issue. I think this is my final slide. Yes. Thanks. Now I'm open to questions, and thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think CCUS must be a very remarkable technology, but there must be a lot of questions to answer. So first of all, may I ask Dr. Komatsu to give us your comment on both Dr. Swain's and Dr. Higa's presentations? You are muted. You are muted, Dr. Komatsu. Okay, yes,
Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
I can hear you.
Thank you very much for both Swain and Dr. Higa. Both are very much interesting and informative and educative to me. I think, a question and my comment is relating to both of the presentation of Dr. Swain and Dr. Higa. I think it's relating to renewable energy and sort of how you transform CO2 into the possible desirable form. As I have been deeply involved with nature, ocean, I'm always kind of supportive of idea of using a best use of the nature instead of artificial endeavors. Although I think, such artificial endeavor may contribute to a certain extent to the solution of CO2 emission reduction to some extent at the surface, if not as far as I believe, long-term sort of solutions. Dr. Svein mentioned about hydroelectric power, which is dam, and he explained to us some sort of problem, pros and cons, and benefit and disbenefit or negative aspect by the construction of a dam in terms of damage to the ecosystem in the Sami land. So I'd like to hear more about what is the sort of controversy and environmental damage and vis-a-vis to the merit of a dam being sort of created in those areas to look at the overall merit for the Spain. Sweden, sorry. And I think secondly, for the Dr. Higa, I think this is a really good ideas, but I am sort of, working with US, professionals and scientists about the best use of nature. Nature have a function of producing oxygen and also absorbing the CO2s, like a wetland and floodplain and forest and coastal lines. Rather than kind of using the artificial sort of facilities, I'm wondering those who studied those kind of technology may sometimes look upon the possibility of using ecosystem service of the ecosystem and the biodiversity to produce the CO2 and also to intake and absorb CO2 into the kind of best use for the human nature as a fuel, as a food, or whatever. So to some extent, my question may be irrelevant to those two speakers, but nevertheless, since my expertise is nature, so that casting this those kind of questions to stimulate your point of view, I believe of some merit and of some values as far as I'm concerned. Make sense or not?
Thank you very much, Dr. Komatsu, for your inspiring questions. So may I ask Dr. Svein to respond to Dr. Komatsu and Ambassador Valgo and Dr. Jalam's comment?
Oh, thank you. I don't know where I should start, but I think there are not many questions, but I will be responding to Dr. Masawuki's comments in the beginning, because I remember that now. The idea is actually this is a very important thing we must realize. Of course, we like to be going back to the nature, but the truth is that there is even the youth who wants to or who are in the forefront of this climate movement, are they really willing to compromise with the living standard what they do have in this part of the world? And I think this is an important part we must realize, that that's why the technology comes into play, the role, because there is any moment, or I mean, I don't have time now, but I a long time back I used to head a center where a lot of young activists were part of that center, extremely committed to the global environmental issues, the climate issues, But there is also at the same time, the living standard was as any, when I compare to my young days, is a very, very different. And there was no way they were interested in compromising on that part. So idea is that we'll buy out of the trouble. We can buy some kind of branded or the eco stuff, which is, all these things, which is another discussion to how that really negates the whole idea. But coming back to this, I think there have been success story of the technology. Sweden used to have Sweden is very famous for its paper and pulp industries. In 1960s, 70s, the amount of paper and pulp industry was Sweden was producing, that had polluted the river like anything. But now Sweden is producing 3 to 5 times more than what it used to do in the 1960s and 70s. But the rivers are extremely clean. You can even drink the water. The river flows next to my office. I won't suggest that, but at least you can drink it, and you will not. Nothing will happen. So I think this is there is a massive change because of the technology. Whether I think this is what Dhanasri was saying, whether the technology which we have, how much we are sharing with others. Do we have the willingness to share with others? It's not that we don't have technology. We produce a lot of technology in this university where I work, but is it available to countries where they can make big differences? No. And I think that's a big gap exists, that the kind of technology even we have, we don't want to share that with others. And that's something which I think we need to realize. The second thing, I think the dam, I some time back, I think a couple of months back, when I was giving a presentation to the ISDP, I talked about the dam and its dam related challenges. Dam is, I think the many countries now have gone back to build big dams. Even China is, and whenever you hear these things that, okay, because we need to move from the non-renewable to renewable resources energy productions. But if anyone has really looked at the dams also contributes hugely to climate change. Look at what is happening in the big dams, which the Grand Ethiopian Renassa Dam, which I was mentioning, the third phase of filling will take place. Millions of hectares of forests have been cut. In some places, even they don't cut it. They just flood the rivers, flood the dam. And those are the things which really take those dams creates a huge methane gas, and that is an accelerating agent of the climate change. But then the displacement, the taking away the rights of the people. A country, I mean, I will come back to Sweden, but the country like when I wrote a book on the dam displacement in India and how the people protest long time back, 12 years back. And that is the time when I saw the 20 million people in India itself have been displaced because of the dam. Most of them are indigenous people, Samis of India. There are 18 million only 2 million have been only compensated. 18 millions haven't. And 2 million compensated mostly in cash, means probably they bought it all the alcohol in few days, and that's it. There is no compensation of that time of this. So I think it's a huge global problem. We all know that, and I can even talk about it. And how it is in Sweden is an issue, because I think it is. I agree with Ambassador Vargo's idea that these movements should not really, or this idea of fighting for climate change should be focused only on climate change, not to really take the other issues. I'm not saying what is happening but I think what happens, climate change also partly is directly connected with other issues. And so how to keep that separate is something is impossible to do. But very quickly, because I think we are running out of time, I will just say in Sweden, Sweden, a country which you don't expect people to be. I mean, we're a country which prides itself on being a moral superpower, being extremely providing an environment where any people of any caste, class, caste, whatever they call it, can really do it and that do it well. But still, if you look at the dams, the way things are, the way the present debate going on, the Sami debate, which the indigenous people have been taken out of their land, or taken out of or even taken out from the different ways into the different system. Even the church recently, Swedish church recently sent public apology because of that. And it's become a very serious issue here. I didn't expect in Sweden to be a serious issue when you historical apology, which it becomes. And I think we need to realize there are lots of countries, even in Sweden, because I rarely look at the Swedish issue, because I always thought that the Sweden is a country, nothing happens, and I look for trouble all over the world. But now, I mean, but I think the Sweden politics is becoming more interesting these days, which I'm gradually trying to getting interested. Before I was not, because I thought it's quite boring. But the thing is, if you look at it, it's really now we must see that there are lots of fault lines still exist, even in a country like Sweden, in the issue like even climate change. So that's something which we need to realize. The other challenges which we have in different ways, how to address this, how to globally look at this kind of to bring North, South together, developing countries together. Dhanasri was talking about the divisions within the globe, with the developed countries within Europe. We change our politics with like what the US did in the 4 years Trump era, completely different politics than what happened after last 1.5 years in the US. But the thing is, what has been successful? Not much, because if you look at it, of course, probably the overall messaging is good. But I think if you look at what has been implemented on the ground, extremely limited, not much happening in that sense. And as I mentioned, I think the real development or real progress will not take place if the world, the North coming together, North, South coming together. But the first thing and the most important thing at this phase, as I realized, to get US, China together on one platform. And if that hasn't worked on climate change issue, I don't think anything is going to really make any big progress in this way. Thank you. I will stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Hiya, can I have your comment on Dr. Komatsu's question or comment?
Yes, I agree that we need to have more, we need to use more our ecosystem, or we need to consider more the possibility of using or integration more our ecosystem, and not focusing so much on artificial facilities. However, I also believe that we can consider an integration or an inclusion of both elements or both possibilities, because now we have a lot of challenges. We have the climate, the climate targets that we are far away to achieve, and then we don't know if we will be able to fulfill the Paris Agreement, unfortunately. And Sweden is a very interesting and nice country, considering that we are trying to do something and we are trying to consider the environment in the best possible way to have a better society and to have a more sustainable society. but unfortunately, we cannot say, or we cannot consider the same scenario for different countries. I think, because I think the Nordic area is a kind of an exception. And we also need to consider that different countries have different economic conditions. And then sometimes it's hard to say that this and this country need to be more sustainable if they have other more urgent issues to solve. But I think we need to focus more on the positive side of the technology that we have. And for sure, it's more, it would be better if we could have more natural solutions. But I really think that we also need to consider and to include technology solutions, especially the ones that are clean solutions, in order to have a more sustainable society, because we have a big challenge. And then we need to consider everything in order to tackle the challenges that we have now.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Mr. Kobayashi, can I have your comment on Dr. Higa's presentation? You are muted.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentations. I have joined only 20 minutes ago, so I just had Dr. Higa's presentation. But I just have one comment. I talked with one of the chemical industry's expert last week, and he said the chemical industry is critically dependent on CCUS because their raw material is significantly reduced to 10% or so because they cannot depend on the fossil fuel in the near future. But I very much agree with Dr. Higa's suggestions that the technology needs wider perception or recognition, because even the industry experts don't believe in CCUS yet. So I think this is a very important opportunity to widely let CCUS be known to the society. That's all for now.
Thank you very much for your comments. So, Dr. Higa, would you please respond to him?
Yes. Sweden is trying to follow a path in which the fossil fuels will be less and less important. And then we have a small percentage of the fossil fuels that are being used now, but I think we are doing a great job on being more sustainable and using less fossil fuels. And then CCUS is a kind of a complement to other technologies that we have to have this cleaner society. And I think the chemical industry is CCUS technology is very important for the chemical industry today. And there are more industries that are also connected to CCUS. But I think the big challenge that we have now, considering this technology, is to have the support of our government, to have more policies and to have more instruments in order to support this technology, because it's still a very expensive technology and we need to have more support in order to disseminate this technology.
Okay, thank you very much. So, okay, next, Dr. Sakiyama, would you please give us your comments?
Yeah, thank you, Shikata-san, and thank you, both presenters. I have a question for Higa-san. Okay, so Higa-san, thank you very much for your presentation about the CCUS. So I would like to ask you a question about the public opinion about CCUS or other geoengineering technologies in Sweden. Okay? Because as long as I know, geoengineering technologies, including CCUS, are not always welcomed, mainly due to two concerns. First, some people worry that if geoengineering technologies like CCUS can be realized, the society will stop the effort to reduce emissions. Some people worry about that. But because it's unclear whether geoengineering technologies can be feasible or not. So some people think we should not stop, we should not rely on the possibility of geoengineering technologies and keep the effort for emission reduction. So that's one concern. And also, some other people worry that geoengineering technologies might have serious side effects on the Earth, this planet. So such people also criticize geoengineering technologies like CCUS. So I'm curious, what Swedish public opinion is saying about geoengineering technologies like CCUS, because Sweden is an advanced country about this technology. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tsukiyama-sensei. I think his point is a very critical question to answer. So Dr. Higa, will you please respond to him?
Yes. Okay, in Sweden, I think there is a global tendency to consider that the public opinion in Sweden is very supportive, considering environmental issues and all of these issues. However, there is a big percentage of the population that are not aware of sustainable issues. And I think this is a problem not only in Sweden, but this is a global problem. But because Sweden has this very good image considering sustainability, I think for the other countries, they consider that Sweden could be in a different position. But because I was working with public opinion related to the carbon tax in my thesis, I can say that the public opinion in Sweden is not that different from other countries, but maybe our government is more keen on developing more sustainable policies. And then because of that, there is a kind of, the consequence is that the world has this good image about Sweden. And about the geoengineering technologies and etc. This is a very difficult question here, because we have some people that are defending that we can be as natural as possible, and then they don't understand how this technology can be implemented, and they think that this technology is not good or is not enough in order to reduce the emissions, because they think that this is not feasible, this is not economically feasible or environmentally feasible. And then this is a big challenge here. And also in Denmark, I think they had the same problems, because some people were not doing a kind of a strike, because the Nordic people are not like the French people, yeah, but they were protesting in their way against CCUS in Denmark because of the geological condition that Denmark had. And then I think for Sweden, it will be also very challenging. I mean, it's not impossible, and then we need to inform the population somehow, but it's still an issue here, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much for answering. I think Higa-san's answer is quite interesting, because the public opinion in Sweden is quite different from Japanese one. Let me say one thing. Here in Japan, climate change mitigation and energy transitions are not widely supported at all. For example, although a national election is coming soon in Japan, but no political party emphasizes climate change policies. So it is maybe because most of Japanese people are not interested in climate change and climate policies as a policy issue. So I think the situation in Japan is quite different from that in Sweden. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Dr. Fuji,
sorry,
yes,
can
please.
I speak just I think the situation is not exactly what you think in Sweden is. I will just send a sentence probably, yeah, but I think it's a quite changing. It's not all good as it seems.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments.
Dr. Swain.
So, Dr. Fujino, sorry to keep you waiting. So, would you please
no,
ask a question?
no problem. Thank you very much for kind invitation, and then thank you very much, Jagannath-san, for having the good time in Stockholm when I visited Stockholm in the beginning of this month. I also visited Uppsala, city of Uppsala, also University of Uppsala. This is very beautiful city. I really want to come back because the Uppsala University, Celsius, Professor Celsius have a study on temperature last the 300 years ago, sometime to 200 years ago. I don't remember where, but so he is expert in climate. Of course, in Uppsala, there is Professor Linne. He's a professional on the nature side. So it's like a climate and the nature synergy. So it's quite great. And then I have a question to maybe both of you. I visited the Stockholm Royal Seaport. This is a kind of the latest smart city in Sweden after the Hammarby Sjöstad. And then Miss Sachiko Takami, who lived in Sweden more than 30 years from Japan. And then she is the founder of the Natural Step Japan. That is a group shares the idea backcasting to Japan, late 1990. When I visited the Stockholm Royal Seaport, all the public bus run by the biogas, not only the Hammarby Royal Seaport, but also the Stockholm City Hallway. And then I saw that there is a biomass generation plant, former coal-fired power plant. Now it's a biomass the generation plant with CCUS by the EU fund. And then I heard that there is a kind of criticism on this new development because of the kind of nature positive aspect, or also, yeah, and then because in Sweden you have a good forestry industry, but there is some criticism on that you may produce more than recovery speed of the nature. So about that the biomass plus CCUS, how do you observe this new development in Stockholm Royal Seaport or any other in Sweden? And then how you'd like to solve this problem? Because this is kind of the latest case in the world. And so, yeah, I'm very much happy to listening to your opinion because I visited there. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So may I ask Dr. Swain to answer first?
Okay, thank you. I mean, I will answer it in general. I think this discussion is that the Sweden, of course, there have been differences. Different political parties have the different positions. The number of groups which have also very strong opinions, what should be done. I remember there was a lot, because we are going to election in a couple of 3 months, I think. And then there have been, in the last election, several researchers or scholars wrote a debate piece that we write the op-ed in the Sweden's main newspaper, the Dagens Nyheter, saying that the political parties, when they come to power, they must, before election, they must commit how much of climate change or the greenhouse gas reductions they will make, rather than putting this kind of idea that, yeah, we are for this, we are for that, that's fine. But just put that number saying that this much they will do.
And that was a kind of, that brought a strong reactions. I mean, I didn't expect that I think in a country like Sweden, and I never expected that this will be leading to that much of criticism from the common people, that why we are forced, what is the point this is going into. So I think it's a much more varied within the country, the opinion is, but what has really kept Sweden on the track is the political leadership. The political leadership's commitment across party line, particularly at the central level, has been very strongly into taking these actions or measures, which is more pro-environment, taking some issues which is for the climate change. I mean, of course, I have you said you came for the Stockholm 50. I wish the government was more prepared. Governments would have been made it much more brought out from this big gathering which was there. I thought it is absolutely that because our focus, as I said, after Ukraine, the political leadership has moved into some other directions rather than keeping, because Stockholm 50 was a very lost opportunity, as I must say. This is absolutely. But I think what has happened in Sweden is a country, I think, because the maturity of political leadership across party line, it continues to show. But there have been a strong opinion, and also, I mean, people in general. I mean, there have been other opinions, but I think overall people do realize, and it has come from the public discourse, the media, the way you bring this issue up to the people, the engagement of the different groups. So I think it's a somehow because of, but I think the whole thing, I must say that. Despite everything, the political leadership has kept its focus, and that's why it has reached there.
Thank you very much. Dr. Higa, will you respond?
Yes, but I think Dr. Ashok's answer was so good that I don't know if I have more points to add. Maybe one, but I don't know if this is so important. I think one very good thing that I see in Sweden, because I lived in different countries, I think the mobilization of the young people here is something very important. And then it's different when you compare or when you consider different country. And then I think this makes a big difference in the country, because there is also a connection with our parties and with the way that we are leading things here. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Dr. Jayaram, can I have a comment on not only on Dr. Fujino's question, but also any other members' comments?
No, I don't have anything else to add, because there's such a wide variety of conversations that we had. But I think some of the important points raised about geoengineering are very critical in today's conversations, because more and more countries, particularly in the global north, are looking at these technologies as like an alternative, because mitigation is going so slow, or there's not enough political will. I mean, at least from my perspective, this is just going to just open another Pandora's box, which I don't think we should be going in that direction, because this just leaves questions around governance issues, the security implications of using this technology, or the public opinion, or the kind of divisions that exist between the global north and the global south, because it's just going to divide, create more divisions with respect to like haves and have-nots, which is something that we associate more with the arms race. But unfortunately, some of these technologies are also like dual use. So do you want to go in this direction at all? Or, I mean, of course, CCUS may be less problematic, but when we think of, say, solar radiation management and others, it's much more problematic. So I think we have to think of these discussions in a more nuanced way, rather than just looking at, we don't have any other solution, so this is like more or less inevitable. I don't think we should be talking that language at all. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. You raise a very important questions So we have a lot of solutions, but we have also even more questions to answer. So last but not least, may I ask Dr. Swanstrom to give us your final question or final comment? Dr. Swanstrom, can you hear me? I'm afraid you are muted.
Niklas, we can't hear you. Can you? Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Maybe you can sign off and sign in again. Sign out and sign in again. We will wait for a moment. We'll wait for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Professor Swami, you are muted. You are saying something we can't hear.
Yeah, I was just saying that it's because when you are doing this Zoom presentation, sitting inside your own office, then you always tend to be disturbed by other work,
right.
And then you get into this.
He has joined again.
So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Yes. I have had a bit of a problem with my Zoom connections the last few months here. Well, I mean, I think this is extremely interesting, and I think it was a very sort of clear, focused perception of the challenges. And I'm actually really happy, I mean, as a northerner, that the whole issue of the problems that we are facing in Sweden, and it's not an easy task to deal with. And the minority issues that Sweden has experienced is tremendously challenging. And even for, it's not, and as Ashok sort of pointed out very clearly, it's not that Sweden is saved from these challenges. But on the other hand, I think we are moving in the right direction. The Sami Council is, of course, raising this issue very heavily, and they're trying to bring it both to the UN and European Union. And I think that's fair. But I think it also is going to be interesting to look at the whole Arctic issue. And the Arctic, we have a great deal of minorities that are going to face a tremendous challenge in the Arctic environment. And I think that's going to be, unfortunately, maybe neglected. And I think that that's extremely valuable. But I'm actually very much looking forward to continued discussion on this. And I'm very much looking forward to maybe bring this discussion into a broader context from a European point of view, and a collaboration with Japan, and maybe especially on the Arctic, because I think the Arctic becomes a litmus test, how far we can actually deal with these environmental challenges in a time where political relations between Europe and Russia is going to be, well, I'm not going to say a challenge. It's virtually non-existent due to the war in Ukraine and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But still it's necessary to deal with. I'm looking forward to that. And I would just like to extend my gratitude to all the speakers and the commentators and the audience. This has been a very, very enlightening discussion for me, at least. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your concluding remarks. I appreciate it. So thank you very much, Dr. Swain, Dr. Higa, and Dr. Jalan for excellent presentations and insightful comment.